In the previous video, we introduced the emergence of 5 great powers that would dominate European politics from the late 17th century until World War I. We have already examined France and Great Britain. The third great power was the Habsburg Monarchy of Austria. When we speak of Austria in this period, we are really referring to the Habsburg Monarchy, a composite empire that encompassed a wide range of territories. This included modern Austria as well as the Czech lands of Bohemia and Moravia, Slovakia, and large parts of northern Italy. It also extended into regions such as Slovenia and Croatia, and following 1699 came to include most of Hungary. The Habsburgs had experienced dramatic highs and lows since the 1500s. Charles V, a member of this dynasty, ruled a vast empire that stretched across Europe and struggled to contain both the French monarchy and the Protestant Reformation. Yet the Habsburgs also suffered devastating losses during the 30 Years' War. Despite these challenges between 1660 and 1715, the monarchy re-emerged as one of Europe's great powers, primarily by embracing absolutism. The Habsburgs were engaged in nearly constant warfare, fighting on multiple fronts throughout this period. In the West, they faced the expansionist ambitions of Louis XIV's France, while in the East they were locked in prolonged conflict with the Ottoman Empire. In 1683, the Turks reached the gates of Vienna, a crisis that nearly destroyed the Habsburg state. Although the Ottomans failed to take the city, the siege terrified Europe. In response, Austria forged alliances with other German states and launched a major counteroffensive. Like Louis, Austria developed a modern, centralized army that marked a significant shift from earlier military organization. Rather than relying on independent noble colonels, the Habsburg military enforced strict discipline and a clear chain of command. It also implemented standardized training and equipment to ensure consistency across its forces, and created specialized branches for engineering, supply, and artillery, making the army more efficient and professional. With this new force, Austria checked French ambitions and achieved decisive victories against the Ottomans. After lifting the siege of Vienna, 1683, Habsburg armies pushed the Turks out of Austria, Hungary, and eventually back to Belgrade by 1699. These victories crippled Ottoman power in Central Europe. By the end of the 17th century, Austria stood firmly among Europe's great powers. The fourth great power, Prussia, is less familiar to many students. Originally a cluster of disconnected territories in northern Germany, Prussia rose to prominence through the leadership and discipline of its ruling family, the Hohenzollerns. Prussia's rise occurred between 1640 and 1740, under the leadership of 4 consecutive rulers, all confusingly named some combination of Frederick and Frederick William. Frederick William was known as the Great Elector, not because he was the first Frederick, but because he held the prestigious title of Elector of Brandenburg, one of 7 princes entitled to elect the Holy Roman Emperor. Frederick William grew up during the devastation of the 30 Years' War. Prussia had been ravaged by marauding armies. Pillage and famine were widespread. He himself fled to the Netherlands for safety. Determined that Prussia would never again be helpless, he embarked on a sweeping program of military and administrative reform. He created a disciplined, professional standing army and developed a centralized bureaucracy to support it, ensuring greater efficiency and control. At the same time, he reined in the power of local noble assemblies, known as the estates, and increased taxation to provide reliable funding for the military. In doing so, he embraced absolutist governing techniques similar to those used by Louis. The army was small but exceptionally well trained, Prussia's most valuable asset. Frederick William died in 1688, leaving a stronger and more secure state to his son. Frederick William's son, also named Frederick, became Frederick I, the first king of Prussia, not the first Frederick. Unlike his father, Frederick I was more interested in court culture, magnificence, and royal spectacle, in many ways imitating Louis. He built a magnificent palace in Berlin as a symbol of royal power and prestige, while also actively patronizing the arts and promoting learning and culture within his realm. Through these efforts, he sought recognition as a major European monarch, elevating both his court's reputation and Prussia's standing among the great powers of the time. Despite his cultural interests, he did not neglect the army. Under Frederick I, the military continued to expand. Frederick I's son, Frederick William I, was completely unlike his father. Known as the Soldier King or Royal Drill Sergeant, he cared almost exclusively about the army. Under his rule, the Prussian army expanded to around 80,000 soldiers, a remarkable figure for a state with a population of only about 3 million people. This disproportionate military force made Prussia one of the most highly militarized societies in Europe, with a significant portion of its resources and population tied directly to the needs of the army. He personally drilled troops for hours and took enormous pride in their precision. Ironically, he avoided major wars and kept his army intact, partly because he feared losing the soldiers he had so carefully trained. Frederick William I's son, Frederick II, was markedly different from his stern and militaristic father. Rather than focusing primarily on discipline and military affairs, he was drawn to music, philosophy, and flute playing, cultivating a more refined and intellectual lifestyle. In fact, his aversion to his father's grim upbringing led him to attempt to flee Prussia in order to escape his rigid discipline. Yet when Frederick II came to the throne in 1740, he immediately took his formidable army into war and proved to be one of the greatest military commanders of the 18th century. His reign will be discussed in more detail later, but his brilliance completed Prussia's transformation into a European great power. By the early 18th century, the European balance of power had been transformed by the rise and consolidation of formidable states. Austria, under the Habsburgs, reasserted its strength through military reform, centralized authority, and decisive victories over both the Ottomans and France, securing its position in Central Europe. At the same time, Prussia demonstrated how disciplined absolutism, efficient administration, and an exceptionally well-trained army could elevate even a relatively small and fragmented state into great power status. Together with France and Great Britain, and soon Russia, these powers would define the political, military, and diplomatic struggles of Europe for the next 2 centuries.